What's up? I'm B and welcome to my channel. Today we are discussing Dave Hollis, who recently released a new podcast episode from his Patio of Peace. Longtime followers of Hollis lore will remember the Patio of Peace from a video that Dave did. It was actually a live stream on Instagram where he essentially went off on his followers who had not bought his book yet. And it was a whole entire mess.
I don't even know why you follow me. I'm going to be honest. Sorry. It's early. We're on my patio of peace. Dave, go to your peaceful place. Don't yell at these people. Don't yell at these people. They're friends. We're trying to be friendly. Don't yell at these people. I'm just going to say it. I'm coming back. I'm going to be a little intense for a second. I just want you to brace yourself. It's early. I'm wearing American flag socks. You know it's going to be a good day if you're wearing those American flag socks. Why do you follow me if you haven't bought my book? Why do you follow me? If you follow me and haven't bought my book, unfollow me.
Shortly after that live stream happened, there was going to be a men's conference. Dave was supposed to be a keynote speaker. He was hosting this whole thing. Then he put out like 10 slides of text explaining that he needed to take a break from the internet. That was canceled, and he was pretty quiet. He was still showing up in a lot of Heidi Powell, his girlfriend's Instagram stories, on her Zoom calls with her fitness groups, on Facebook Lives with her, for her. But in terms of him posting, things were very limited. To be completely honest, I'm pretty sure he didn't even post anything from his own social media. However, he does have a podcast called Rise Together with Dave Hollis, and while he wasn't posting new content, they were doing re-uploads of previous episodes. The reason for this break has not been explicitly discussed, although Dave has spoken about how he needed to go to a treatment center and work through some things. We don't specifically know what that is, and I'm not entirely sure it is our place to know that. Some things are meant to be kept private, and I do respect that. However, it is a little bit frustrating when you're getting mixed messages from somebody that you are watching, and for people who look up to Dave because he presents himself as a kind of self-help life guru, I can only imagine that that is also frustrating. Regardless of all of that, Dave returned with a brand new podcast episode last week, and it was with himself and Gabby Bernstein, who that is a whole other Pandora's box of issues that I'm not going to open right now. But if we're interested, I can definitely do a bit of a dive on her and just talk about her on the channel. That podcast was definitely an interesting one, and while I certainly have a long list of problems with Dave Hollis, I felt that Gabby wasn't exactly helpful in that podcast. It was like she was trying to turn it into a live therapy session, which if Dave felt it was helpful, great. I'm glad he got something out of it, but it felt very intimate and also inappropriate to do in a podcast setting. That's just me. I would have felt very uncomfortable if I was on the other end of Gabby trying to therapize me when I'm just trying to interview her and have a conversation. But that's just me, to each their own.
Let's not even talk about it. Let's just feel about it. So the runner, we're willing to work with the runner. I got some back in here. Okay. So the runner, just check in with your body, maybe close your eyes and just notice where that part of you lives and where if you might feel anything or if you see a color or have a sensation. Just notice what you notice.
Yeah, same place in my chest, just above my belly button. Yeah.
Okay. Is there a gender?
No. I've always historically identified parts as male, but
okay,
it doesn't necessarily. Yeah, so I'll say male. Yeah.
So it's a male part. Okay. Does this male part, the runner, have an age?
Younger. It's like my 23-year-old self.
22, 23. Perfect. Okay. Any images that come to mind? Any thoughts? Anything that you notice? Anything that you need to check in with here?
No, I mean, the image that I see is this image of like, I'm going to take over the world version of me, like a confident, but also like arrogant, like I'll show them.
Okay, cool. How do you, Dave, this beautiful resourced soul with me right now, how do you feel towards the runner? How do you feel towards them?
A mix. Like, I want to say, like, man, you're going to go do all the things that runners do. And also, I want to tell him he doesn't have to run.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Does he know that you're here?
It's a good question. I don't know.
Does he know I'm here?
Yeah, now he does.
Okay.
Interesting. Yeah.
I just want to extend a lot of love and compassion to the runner right now, and just major acknowledgement for his bravery to visit us and to connect with us in this way. I just want him to feel my my genuine compassion for him. I understand him. I had one myself. I have a runner myself.
Since that podcast episode, Dave did release a brand new episode titled When There Are More Questions Than Answers. And the description says, have you ever been in a season where there are more questions than answers? Us too. Today, Dave comes to you from his patio of peace, talking about this period in his life that looks exactly like that and how he is working through it, reconnecting with himself and his purpose, and putting effort into the things that ground him and bring him joy. If you're in a period of questions, hopefully this episode of Rise Together will give you some inspiration of how to keep you working through it. So I listened to this episode, I took some notes, I screen recorded some clips, and we're going to talk about them. Before we get into that, I need y'all to pray for Arizona. Nothing's technically wrong here, but we're officially at that point in the year where it's so dry and so hot that if you sit outside for like 10 minutes, you feel worn down for the rest of the day, and we're struggling. So we could use any good juju that y'all got. Starting this podcast off, Dave automatically creates a false sense of intimacy with his viewers, talking about how he's broadcasting to you from the patio of peace and how you should stop by if you're in the area. We all know that that's not anything that any rational human being would do or would think is like an appropriate action to take. However, it's still weird to me that he says it. I don't like it. Moving on, he talks about how essentially when he's struggling, he likes to go to his tried and true ways of kind of getting through something or grounding himself, and that is by running. And so he wanted to run a full marathon, but he only managed 10 miles, which I recently got a treadmill. It's a little compact treadmill for my office, and I hit 3 miles, and I'm like, wow, V, you did something. So I guess we're on different playing fields, but that's fine. So Dave talks about how he has kind of these segments of intention while he's running. At first, he likes to run in silence, then he likes to run with some music, and then he likes to listen to a sermon or a podcast. Dave talks about how he likes to just be open kind of to inspiration or different thoughts that he think could be good for conversation or things that he wants to bring to his therapist and say like, well, hey, what do we think this was about? And when those things pop up, he'll put them in the notes on his phone. And so in this episode, he's essentially going over some of the notes that he made on this most recent run. At about the 11-minute mark, Dave brings up Rachel and the divorce and kind of what the saddest part of the divorce was for him. And I think it's a really interesting perspective that can kind of tell us a lot about how he viewed the marriage compared to how Rachel viewed the marriage.
Of mourning this idealized version of how I wish things were, rather than mourning the reality of how things are or how things were. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'll give you a for example. Divorce is something that's hard. Oh my goodness, so hard for anyone to have to go through and process. And the grief that inevitably comes up in the aftermath of divorce is real. I mean, it's just not a thing that you can walk through without experiencing it. But one of the biggest breakthroughs I had in my own grief journey was the ability at one point to recognize that the thing I was saddest about was actually not the end of the relationship as it was. The thing I was grieving the most was that our marriage hadn't continued to be what I hoped it could have been, right? There was this idealized version of what I wish we were, that either as individual people or as two humans that connect or as a family that, creates a system that works really, really well. I was mourning that it didn't work out the way I wish it had, not so much that it didn't work out in its existing form. And that's the kind of objectivity that, of course, only ends up coming to someone after they are outside of that relationship, when they've had time to process and look back with something of clearer eyes.
So Dave was mourning what he had hoped the marriage would become, not what it was. He was mourning the idealized version of the marriage. So that tells us that even in the months leading up to the divorce, Dave wasn't necessarily content in that relationship. It's, not that he said that outright, but if we are to take what he says and draw a logical conclusion, that's where we get. It wasn't that he was like, man, I love Rachel. I love our dynamic. I love what we do together. Like, this is a really great teamsmanship. This is a really great partnership. We are awesome together. It's that he had somebody in his mind that he wanted Rachel to become, which is a really, really bad place to be in a relationship. Even if it's like a friendship or a family member relationship, you should never hold somebody to a standard that you have in your head. You need to see them for who they are. You need to accept them for who they are. And don't get me wrong, don't take that to mean like, oh, if somebody in your family's toxic, you need to, just be okay with it. No, you need to be realistic about who they are and move accordingly. And so it's just really interesting to me that Dave wasn't sad about the relationship with Rachel ending. It was like this dream of what could have been was taken away from him, what he had hoped they would eventually evolve into. Ooh, man, I cut out a lot of fluff on this. Like, the next one is just bang. At about the 20-minute mark, he talks about how one thing he wrote down was, sometimes you believe your own press, both good and bad.
The next day, we were asked to identify how the opinions of other people affected the way that these dots landed on this paper, right? So how much of outside influence played a role in how you felt great about yourself or not so great about yourself. And the answer for me, and it's hate to confess that there is such a correlation, is that there was almost a 100% of the time causal relationship, tied relationship, cause and effect. That if me doing something afforded me praise from a third party, could be my kids, could be my ex-wife, could be Heidi, could be people online, could be a number of books sold, could be whatever. If there was something that was third party validating me or invalidating me, criticism, something that someone said that hurt my feelings or made me feel shame, whatever it is, almost every single time, third party reaction was responsible for the way I was feeling about myself. And that was I think that we all, in some respects, of course, are conscientious to social pressure and the idea of, wanting to be loved and accepted as we are. Of course, I feel that also, but I also don't want to be beholden ever to only feeling good about myself when applause is coming in. And as soon as that applause stops, or God forbid, when people start being hypercritical or hateful, then it has the inverse effect, and immediately I feel terribly about myself, and I don't love myself, and they're right, and I'm broken, and all the things that end up coming with it.
Okay, this point is critical for everybody, I feel like, to kind of evaluate, register, and understand. So Dave had this assignment from his treatment center where he was supposed to put things on kind of like a timeline. It was kind of confusing how he explained it, because at first I thought it was like an age timeline, but then it sounded like it was a scale from up to down. Anyway, you talk about different events and how those things made you feel, like something that made you feel really good versus something that made you feel really bad. And essentially what Dave comes to is all of those things on that list were influenced by somebody else. How he felt about himself was directly related to how other people were viewing, praising, or judging him. And I think a lot of us can kind of get wrapped up in that. When other people tell us we're doing a good job at something, it feels good. And in that same vein, when somebody tells you you're a piece of crap or you're bad at something, that makes you feel bad. That's a normal response to have to outside feedback. However, we need to be very careful about filtering that, especially if we spend a lot of time on social media, or like for Dave, as somebody who is a public figure who relies on social media for a lot of his business, he absolutely needs to be monitoring that on a daily basis until he gets better about filtering that stuff out. Yes, people are going to have opinions on you, and sometimes those opinions will make you feel good and they will make you feel bad. But I think it's really, really important to kind of figure out certain things that you do, that you have 100% control over, that make you feel good and that make you feel bad. And so that way you can focus more on those, because those are the things that you control. You can't control what other people are going to say about you or how they are going to perceive you. And of course, I'm talking about like when people just hate you for no reason, or when people leave like mean comments for no reason. If you've genuinely done something wrong, in a way, you are controlling how someone perceives you because you've done something bad. But I'm talking about kind of people who hate you for no reason, or people who are just mean because they're mean, or because they're trolls, or because they're having a bad day, stuff like that. But I think it's important to identify those things within yourself. Like when I keep a promise to myself, I feel good. That would be on the high point of my scale. When I say I'm going to do something and I don't follow through with that, I feel bad. And in that way, like, I'm in control of me. I control whether or not I follow through on something or I don't. And so I feel like it's a lot healthier to kind of focus on those things, the things that you have control over, because you can't control other people. And it's going to get real unhealthy real fast if you find all of your validation, or if all of the input you get about yourself is coming from other people and you are taking that as gospel. And just as an aside, this is why I believe there should be heavy boundaries placed between yourself and social media. As in, not everything needs to be shared. You don't need to be on your phone all the time. Not everything needs to go in a story. If you really want to post it, maybe you take the picture and you put the phone away and you post it when you get home, so that way you can actually enjoy the time with the people that you are spending time with. All right, and then pretty quickly after, we've got another just oof kind of clip where he's talking about the book.
Right? If creating a book is something that ends up coming with people who don't like the book, and because they don't like the book and I have combined who I am with what I made, if they don't like it, then I take it as they don't like me, and that then makes me not want to create anything. Oy, there's a dilemma. And so finding a way to work through and workshop, how do you free yourself? How do you free yourself, Dave, from anyone ever having access to the way that you feel about yourself is an incredibly important and super difficult mission that I am on and have been on for some length of time.
I think that gives us some insight onto why he maybe acted the way that he did in that Instagram live. Not that it justifies it or makes it okay, but when you understand that he's coming from a place of, I've combined who I am with what I've made. And if this book doesn't do well, or people don't like it, or people don't want to buy it, or people aren't interested, that means that I'm bad. That means that I'm a failure. I'm a piece of crap. And I understand why somebody would feel that way. I understand why those things would get combined in your head, because in your mind, you're like, well, this book is a reflection of me. So this is part of me. And if people don't like it, that says something about me. And maybe it does to some extent, because the book could be the best book in the entire world, but because Dave Hollis wrote it, I personally would not buy it, because I do not support what the Hollises have done, and I don't think that they have made up for the harm that they've caused to their followers. However, Dave still does have a lot of people who follow him, and a lot of those people apparently were not buying the book. The book was not doing well. There was supposed to be a whole documentary about it. That got canceled. Book tour was kind of a flop, and so you can see why that might spiral somebody out of control if they already have self-esteem issues, if they already have self-worth issues, if they already are in a place where they are feeling like something's wrong with them and something's wrong with their life. Again, not making it right, not making an excuse for the way he behaved on that live stream, but I still think that's an important thing for him to have recognized, and hopefully he can work on that going forward. Because the thing is, I don't ever want anybody to feel bad about themselves. Even if I criticize somebody 100 times, I'm criticizing their actions and the way that they behave and the way that they present themselves. I still believe in treating people the way that I would want to be treated, even if I disagree with them. I don't like when people feel bad about themselves, and so I felt bad hearing that. Next, we're going to talk about something that Dave said right around the 27-minute mark. He said FOMO online is something that comes at the expense of actually missing out in person. And I thought that that was very astute.
So what I ended up saying out loud was, the fear of missing out online is something that comes at the expense of actually missing out in person, right? The fear of missing out online comes at the expense of actually missing out in person. I thought I had a good handle on the way that being social media connected was affecting my in-person connection. And it wasn't until I was no longer on my phone in the midst of hangouts with family or playing with my kids or frankly, anything that I've felt the connection and the depth and the thing that, of course, all of us are meant to feel because of the absence of distraction. Because instead of trying to capture photos or videos, there's just an opportunity to be present in the moment and create eye contact and actually laugh when the joke is done instead of just seconds after you were supposed to laugh because of having been distracted by something you were holding in an iPhone.
Again, I will say social media boundaries. I get it. Most of us are used to just having the expectation that oh, whatever happens in your day-to-day life, you post it on social media because that's what all your friends are doing and that's what celebrities are doing. But I think we should be really intentional about how we use social media and making sure that we are not, like Dave said, we're not using it at the expense of missing out on what's happening in our real life and missing those important moments with people that we care about. Again, we just got to keep those boundaries because real life is here. There's more to life than the internet. And I know it's hard to disengage sometimes, but life does go by just so fast. And there's so many moments that you'll miss if you are too intent on being tied to your phone. We got to put the phones down sometimes and just truly enjoy being in the moment because you're not going to get that moment back. On a side note, we're going to call Dave out a little bit because he talks about his birthday and how he told Heidi, oh, if you have a birthday and you don't post about it on social media, did it even happen? Dad jokes 101. But he talks about how he was not on social media throughout his entire birthday. He was not there. However, we saw him on a Facebook Live with Heidi on his birthday. I don't know, I guess because he didn't post it, he considers that being off social media. And I guess this is all technicalities because, sure, you didn't post it, you didn't have to engage in the comments or whatever it was after it went up, but you're still performing for social media. You're still putting on a persona for social media, and I think that's part of what his problem was before and the reason that he wanted to take a break to focus on himself. Next, we get another little nugget about Rachel. Right about 32 minutes, Dave talks about how Rachel expressed that social media did not do anything to help their marriage, even though it wasn't the sole thing that destroyed it.
I was talking to Rachel about having stepped away from social and how I was shocked at how much I hadn't been conscientious of, that I only, kind of was after having stepped away. And we haven't spent a ton of time getting into the details of, of divorce after divorce. But it was one of the first times that there was at least an acknowledgement. She said, I know there were a whole host of other things, other, reasons that, we are better on our individual paths, but our being on social in the way that we were, being, on a live stream every morning and doing as many things as we did, certainly wasn't helpful. It's not the root cause, but it's certainly among a list of things that made some of what was already not working not work even more, and probably accelerated the conversation in some respect. So I don't know. I know there's benefit and value to sharing the fact that you have found love on the internet, but I do hope that I will not make the same mistakes that I have made in the past, and preserve some of what is meant for just me and the person that I'm in a relationship offline, so that I can keep it safe. Keep it safe.
First of all, phrasing. The person I'm in a relationship with. He mentioned Heidi earlier in the podcast, so we know that whole thing is still going on, but it's just interesting to me that he phrased it that way, because maybe I'm reading way too deep into it, but I'm like, oh, so you're thinking that maybe there will be somebody else you're in a relationship with in the future. That's why you didn't say Heidi. Just like a tinfoil hat conspiracy theory happening right there. Moving on, though, I think that is a very true statement from Rachel. Social media wasn't the entire problem in their relationship. It's not why they got divorced, but it certainly didn't help. the way that they presented themselves on social media, the way that they did live streams every day, the way that they made so much of their content about having a thriving relationship when they were fighting to save theirs behind the scenes. In my head, I picture it like it's the equivalent of, if somebody gets shot, what should you do? You should try and stop the bleeding. You should get some fabric. You should try and put pressure on the wound and get them to the hospital. That is what you should do. But Dave and Rachel's approach was to try and stick their fingers in the bullet wound and get the fragments out. Like, that's what they're trying to do. They're making it worse and worse and worse because they keep pushing and they're not addressing the actual issue. They're saying, if we can do all these things, if we can present ourselves in this certain way, it'll be okay. We're patching it up. We're hiding the actual issue, and then we don't have to address it. We can just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, but then nothing gets better. Nothing gets fixed because you haven't addressed the actual issue. You have not stopped the bleeding. You have not taken the time to go address the problem and get it properly solved. That sounds so stressful to me. The thought of like being in a crumbling marriage and yet every day doing a live stream with your spouse without addressing what's going on behind the scenes, it makes me sad for them, but it also infuriates me all over again, knowing that they were still selling tickets to their Rise Together weekends and, misleading their followers and taking their money to teach them about marriage, a subject which they were not qualified in any way, shape, or form to teach on. After this part, things get kind of confusing because Dave talks in a way that's kind of vague. And I think he does that so that way it can be relatable to a lot of people. But he talks about how we need to break generational curses and generational trauma and have compassion for those people who inflicted that upon us because they were doing the best with what they had. But then he goes on to say, like, well, I don't have any generational curses, but like for people who do, he says, like, I admit that I'm in a really good spot and like I don't have that stuff, but other people do. So I'm just like, then why are we talking about it if this is about you? Anyway, I do think that there is something to be said about understanding that people who may have inflicted trauma upon you in your childhood were doing the best that they could with what they had and the skill set that they had in the childhood that they grew up in. And we do need to have compassion for most people in that situation, depending on, of course, all the details of what happened. However, I don't quite understand why it's being brought up when we're talking about Dave if he's saying that he doesn't have those things. I think probably what he's referring to is the fact that for a lot of his childhood and even into his young adulthood, he was really praised for the things that he accomplished and the things that he achieved, not just told that you're loved for who you are. And that can give you a bit of a complex. That can kind of skew your priorities a little bit. So I think that's what he was referring to. But again, it wasn't super clear. If you didn't know Dave, you probably wouldn't be able to like dig through and decipher what are you most likely talking about. Our next and final clip starts right about the 46-minute mark where Dave talks about turning pain into purpose.
I know I was made this way. I was made this way on purpose. And there is intention and goodness in the creation that is me, that before I make anything, before I do anything, that there is purpose that will come from me having been made this way on purpose. And so, irrespective of whatever you find yourself confronting or walking through, the way that you may have seen something having happened as a thing that you're having to deal with or that you don't deserve or that whatever it might end up being, when you're living life in or you're working through this idea of like, hey, you get to live your life how it is, not how you wish it were, how it is was on purpose. I'm here in this way, very intentionally, on purpose, for purpose. And even in the midst of having more questions than I might have answers, I can stay every single day connected to faith in this being exactly the journey that I'm meant to be on, to discover all of what I'm meant to and who I am so that I can show up even better for who I'm meant to be. And it doesn't mean I don't have the hard days. I mean, I get emotional telling you that I'm made this way on purpose because in some ways it forces me to push back against some of the voices inside that question the good in some of the parts that I don't yet love about myself. And so I'm gonna be a work in progress on that for some time, but I do know the truth. I just have to come back to and remind myself of that truth over and over and over again.
What are you even talking about? That is so broad and general and so confusing. And if there is one thing that I don't trust, or one kind of person that I don't trust, it is a self-centering self-help guru who speaks vaguely about themselves. I think that when people do self-help, they shouldn't base it on like their life and their personal experiences and what worked for them, because that's what works for them and their life in the situations that they are in the circumstances and resources and privileges and benefits that they have. That's not going to be applicable to everybody, right? You know, it's the reason that you go to a licensed therapist if you need therapy, instead of just any old person who is relatively happy. You know, that person might have wisdom, but they're not qualified to teach you techniques that work specifically for you or for people in general. And they can say, oh, well, why don't you try this? Okay, that thing's working, great, let's keep going on that. Or, okay, maybe that approach isn't necessarily a good fit for you, so what if we tried this instead? You know, they have the tools in their little tool belt to actually be effective in helping you. And so if you're a self-help guru, I don't think you should base your advice on your life. Regardless of that, Dave is that kind of person. He is a self-centering self-help guru. And I don't know what he is talking about. What do you mean you are made this way? What way? That could mean anything. And it's great to take a look at traits about yourself that maybe have been a hindrance to you, or that in the past you thought were a burden, like maybe feeling too much, like feeling too deeply and being like, man, I wish I didn't feel everything so deep in my gut, like in my core, because it really just, it throws me sometimes and it takes focus away from the thing that I need to do because I can't get over these emotions. And like that can be something where you can say, yes, maybe sometimes it's inconvenient, but also it's very beautiful that I can feel things so deeply and I can have empathy for other people and I can understand how other people feel, and I can care for them and I can treat them accordingly because I can feel that, right? That's a trait where, okay, maybe it's inconvenient, maybe you wish that it was changing, but there are positive sides to it. However, that could also apply to somebody who just like, I don't know, can't take criticism. And you say, well, like, that's just who I am. God just made me that way. God designed me not to listen to criticism. And so I'm going to embrace it and I'm going to love it. You know what I mean? You know, I have this conversation with a lot of people because I have a very low threshold for toxicity in my life. And so when I see people that I care about engaging in toxic relationships and I try to talk to them about it, a lot of the times the excuse you get is like, oh, well, this family member has just always been like that. And the question that I ask is, well, does that make it okay? Like, does that make it right that they've always been like that? Or is that something that's not okay and that you don't want to tolerate in your life? Because just because somebody has always been like that, or that's how things have always been, doesn't mean that you have to accept them. That doesn't mean like if you have a short temper, oh, God just designed me that way, so that's who I am. I was made with intention. Yeah, sure. But you were also made with faults, because every single person has a fault. At the end of the day, it's easier to say, well, I was designed like this, and so I accept myself and I love myself, than it is to address those faults and really take a look at how they impact your life and the life of the people around you. So I just wish that he had been a little bit more specific, because like I said, I feel like it's real easy to take that and twist it in whatever way is most beneficial to you. And I would also like to know what traits Dave is talking about that make him emotional like that, because again, I don't want anybody to ever feel bad about themselves. I want people to understand that they have value and they can do good things and they can do important things and they are worthy. But again, that empathy has a limit when somebody is being vague or making things all about them instead of serving their community, that they, you know, they built their platform to serve other people and they're not doing that. They're kind of making it a pity party for themselves. And I'm not saying that that's what Dave does all the time, but I get a little bit of that vibe. So yeah, just the entire podcast was very interesting. I think there were some good points that he made, and there were some points that I obviously had to push back on. But it seems like Dave is making his return. Slowly but surely he is coming back. And if anything else interesting pops up, I will be sure to let you know about it. In the meantime, let me know what you thought about those clips. Is there anything you found interesting or you agreed with or you want to push back on? Leave it in the comments down below, and while you're doing that, if you would consider liking this video or subscribing to my channel, that would be incredible. And if you're subscribed already, thank you so much. I am so appreciative of you, and I love being able to just sit here, hang out with you, and talk about whatever. Thank you so much for watching. Please be kind to people, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.